At least 23 local government areas in Sokoto, Zamfara and Kebbi states have been constantly attacked by kidnappers, cattle rustlers and bandits. Life has been difficult for the residents of those communities as the attacks have forced them to flee those areas. In Sokoto State, the local government areas worst affected are Isa, Sabon Birni, and Gwadabawa, Ilela, Tangaza and Goronyo. In Zamfara State, many communities in the 14 local government areas of the state have been displaced, with residents of Maru, Anka, Shinkafi, Maradun, Zurmi, Gusau and Bungudu local government areas worst affected. Now, the situation in Kebbi State has already claimed the lives of over 2,500 people between 2019 and 2023. That's according to a report from the Zuru Development Foundation. Well, President Bola Tinubu's administration is in full motion with the swearing-in of his cabinet, a cabinet he says he's confident will work. Now, we're taking a look at insecurity, and it is extremely important that the president put a halt to some of the issues of insecurity, as it has become a sore point that refuses to heal. Well, the Minister of Defense, Abubakar Badaru, has tasked the service chiefs to present timelines and requirements for ending insecurity across Nigeria. He says security across the country will improve in 1 year of his tenure as minister. Well, to look critically at the issues of insecurity plaguing Nigeria, I'm joined live in the studio by a former Director of Army Public Relations, retired Brigadier General Sani Usman. Good to see you, and thanks for your time as always.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Well, this is another moment, and but again, the good thing is that we have the same Nigerian army, but we're talking about leadership that has only changed, and again, perhaps day in, day out, strategies will also change. But again, help us make sense of what Nigerians may not understand about these areas specifically. We'll come back to other regions, but these areas are just highlighted in Sokoto, Kebbi and some other states. Perhaps we should have a sense of what we're doing to help the people stem the tide.
Well, making people to understand actually sometimes, but it's good actually to hear the Honorable Minister being so optimistic given the plight of the people, especially in the Northwestern geopolitical zone. In particular, you have seen what it is, and surprisingly, the Northeast that has experienced insurgency and terrorism is not recording the casualties the Northwest is. So it's something that is of great concern, and there is high expectation, particularly the two ministers coming from the same geopolitical zone, having been chief security officers of their state, one coming from Zamfara state. So we expect that they have their fingers on the pulse of what is happening, and of course they will decisively do what it takes to give the necessary direction so that these problems are, if not eliminated, mitigated to the barest minimum. So basically that is because really life is very, very difficult. We are not even talking about other complementary socio-economic hardship. Security is just, worrisome in the sense that people could hardly survive, in the sense that you cannot go to market, you cannot go to farm, you cannot go to school, and within your country you become more or less like a slave. So basically, there is a lot of expectation on the part of the ministers, to perform as regard to that and other aspects too.
We'll talk about other aspects, because listening to you, one of the key things that I just realized is, because you said they've been chief security officers of their states. In other words, they have a better understanding. So it will mean that the president was spot on to have actually put these gentlemen there, so that at least we'll have some form of continuity and some kind of briefing. How does that help in fighting, insecurity?
Well, two things. First and foremost, if we look at the Honorable Minister of Defense himself, the main minister, having been governor of Jigawa State for 8 years. And among the states in the northwestern part of the country, I think Jigawa was having, it's relatively peaceful compared to. So what is it that they did in Jigawa State? Agreed. That is just a microsome of what is happening in the country. And of course, the Minister of State is coming from Zamfara State just recently. So, and of course, Zamfara is one of the worst affected states in the country. So he had a fair understanding of what is going on. Now that he is at the federal level, because there were instances, one of his predecessors actually resigned as chief security officer, due to the prostration of the state. So possibly there could be certain things that were, kind of certain impediments in those days. Now that he's a minister, so there is every likelihood he has something to bring on the table, to bring to bear in mitigating the security challenges. Basically, that is the understanding. So when you look at it, experience really matters. And beyond that, again, anybody, even if you are not staying in this country, one of the key problems that is bedeviling this country is security, particularly in the northwest, west geopolitical zone. So automatically, if you cannot solve it, there won't be any meaningful development. In fact, life is almost non-existent. So whom are you going to develop if people are not scared? Talk less of even developing other sectors. So it is very important that this issue is taken with every sense of responsibility and seriousness that it deserves, so that a lasting solution is found.
And one other aspect will be the military-civil relations, because we understand that in fighting insurgency and insecurity, you can't do that in isolation. There must be some kind of synergy or cooperation between those who are fighting it and those who are being helped to actually uproot these criminals. How much of it have we done so far, given that, or really how best can we smoothen such relationships so that it becomes so easy for the troops and our military to have a relationship with the locals?
Well, it's a combination of so many things that need to be done, but beyond the security architecture as it is, because issue of security is a collective responsibility. That means every person, regardless of socio-economic status, has one role or the other to play, in dealing with the security. But however, there are people who are statutorily responsible to, in dealing with this issue. So the issue of civil-military relation, cooperation, but most importantly, I think the starting point is interagency, cooperation, collaboration, and of course, its own coordination too. And we have to discontinue the issue of this lead agency issue, rather interagency cooperation and collaboration, so that this inter-service rivalry will not be there. So then secondly, when you are dealing with security challenges that kept on evolving, remember, we had the serious issue of insurgency and terrorism, and it evolved into what we're having now, the kidnapping and banditry. And it requires certain special skills, certain understanding beyond what it was before, even though it is also kinetic that you've been dealing with. But in most instances, there are people that are playing key role in escalating this issue. Take, for instance, the informants and what have you. But then again, it borders to this issue of good governance. The local government system is invariably not working. It could have been a buffer zone. That is one. And you have a population that is over 200 million, 200 million. And out of that, a significant number or percentage, let's say even 60% of it, they are all youth. So bulk of the security challenges, to a large extent, it is the younger ones that are doing it. So you have to find a way of integrating and giving this youth sense of belonging so that they cannot be tempted to do that. And of course, that means employment opportunity, education, infrastructures, and what have you. Take, for instance, even the supply of electricity. Nigerians, they are very, very enterprising and law-abiding and resilient. If you create an enabling environment, they may not necessarily rely on government or white-collar job. So these things go hand in glove in dealing with that. But that is just the second aspect of it. The most important aspect is that you have to understand again, beyond the youth, other components of Nigerian society have a role to play. What happened to our traditional institutions? What happened to our time-tested conflict resolution mechanism? So these are very, very important before you talk about, the security architecture. And when we are talking about it, let's even look at what is the number compared to, the population of this country, particularly our policing system, even the military as it were, compared to, do we have the enough number? And that is one of the priorities of the ministers, that they should ensure that there is enough human resources to deal with it. Then secondly, the issue of the use of technology. I have made mention of the fact that these security challenges they are dynamic and they kept on evolving. So you need modern equipment for surveillance, beyond even surveillance, for targeted operations, instead of endangering, the limited number of human resources that you have. But most importantly, I think there is one other aspect that we need to focus. The previous regime, to their own credit, they have done a marvelous job by setting up a committee, to transform the armed forces and the Ministry of Defense. So the relationship, so that document, which was produced by a former military administrator and I think a former president of the Alumni Association of the National Defense College. So Air Vice Marshal Umaru, he did a marvelous job. And they have gone even a step further by creating another committee headed by a well-respected senior military officer who had been a former chief of army staff, General Awali Kazir, who came up with not just dealing with the recommendation, but even implementation strategies cutting across the various sectors. So this issue that you are talking about, if we focus on it, is it doctrine, is it the relationship, is it the logistics, and so on and so forth. Even the relationship, how does the military relate with the Ministry of Defense? How does the military or the Ministry of Defense as an entity relate with the larger parts of the society? What is their position in the public service sector? So these are some of the things that should be prioritized so that this question that you ask will be answered.
Because listen to you now, it will seem as if we are already on course if and only when the document that has been put in place to speak or address the transformation of our military is being looked into. Because one of the key challenges here will be the grassroots governance, which you spoke about. It is absent and is very essential in the fight against insurgency. What are the challenges, do you think that the minister must address in helping our troops? The good thing is that you're out of service, and we always know that sometimes when people are in service, there are few things they really can't say. Within the space of information that can be given out, are there challenges that we think that the new minister must address as a matter of urgency?
Well, I have just made mention of them. I talked about the number, the human resources, of the armed forces of Nigeria is grossly inadequate, given the security challenge.
So we're talking about recruitment now.
Exactly. But the officer corps and the lower cadre. Then, most importantly, even though there was massive procurement by the previous government, but the dynamism of the security challenges because of wears and tears and all the rest, and so equipping the armed forces is equally very important. More so, there are some of them, they have even gone out of their way. Locally, they have started fabricating and producing certain things. Take, for instance, the Nigerian Navy. So these are things that we should prioritize. And also, the relationship, the military-industrial complex, so that we can be self-reliant. I know, there are so many researches and all the rest. So it is important that we should prioritize so that it can reduce, the cumbersome, bureaucratic process of, purchase of other equipment and what have you. But most importantly, like I said, to a large extent, the security challenges, they require much information and intelligence to deal with. And it is not always that you rely on human intelligence. You need modern equipment that can do a lot of job. Not only that, they could also be carrying out targeted operations. So we need more of this. And where there is none, we should even make effort to procure. It is not just at the operational and tactical level. It should be at strategic level that we should have some of this equipment.
How possible or how feasible is it? Because the new minister says in about a year of his tenure, we should experience, the death of insecurity.
Yeah, well, I made mention at the beginning that it is good that we are, being gingered and we are encouraged to be optimistic. But the reality on the ground is what matters. What are those things that you put in place to ensure? And luckily, we have one of the best in terms of the security agencies. I'm talking about the military and, of course, other security agencies. I think our issue is issue of environmental, because anytime you send out troops on peacekeeping operation or peace enforcement operations, they do marvelously well. So what is wrong that they cannot do better in their own country? So there is issue of what you have said about civil-military relations, and to what extent are we integrating the other components of Nigerian society, talking about the whole society approach. I told you everybody has a role to play. It depends on to what extent you integrate or empower the person to be able to discharge his or her civil responsibility and, as a citizen in terms of dealing with security challenges. So it is not just government issue, it is a collective responsibility. But of course, it will not be a collective responsibility if you have not created an enabling environment for all those key players, not necessarily members of the security architecture, but overall Nigerian society. And I'm so happy now with the change of the nomenclature of some of the ministries, departments, and agencies. Take, for instance, Ministry of Information. Before, it was a Ministry of Information and Culture. Now it is named Ministry of Information and National Orientation. There is something fundamentally missing. What is it that an average Nigerian is not having that sense of belonging, the zeal and determination to see any problem as a collective responsibility, that whatever happens in Zamfara has a corresponding effect on somebody who is in Yenagoa. So, and it is this orientation, giving people a sense of belonging. It is not just enough to come up and mobilize and what have you, but beyond this mobilization, you have to empower the people. You have to think of education. You have to think of sensitization. But again, like I mentioned, how do you make the security agencies or the military to be responsive to all these things, the intelligence, the information being given to deal with the security challenges? Then most importantly, I told you, the equipment, the use of technologies, they are equally very important. So it's a kind of gamut of so many things put together. So there is need for cooperation and collaboration, not within the security architectures, but even the ministers themselves, they have to be interfacing with other ministers to see to what extent. Take, for instance, if you talk about Ministry of Defense, there is no way they can work in isolation without interfacing with Ministry of Police Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Information and National Orientation, and of course, in the Ministry of Interior, and so on.
I want to go back to the human resource, which is very important here. And if you put that side by side with what our military is doing across the country, in fact, there's hardly no geopolitical zone you don't have our military, working at the moment. It would seem as if the Nigerian military is overstretched.
Well, that is why I talked about use of whole society approach, and I talked about not just whole society approach, but the time-tested complete mechanism, resolution mechanism. In those days, everybody has a role to play. Any community, look at all the security challenges. They did not come out of the blues, or at least you can pinpoint them to a particular geopolitical zone, to a particular state, to a particular, senatorial, zone, to a particular local government, to a particular community. So what happened?
So are there places, units, or zones, or states, or areas where you think our military should be withdrawn?
Not issue of withdrawal, but at least when you are, deployed military, there should be timeline of deployment, achieving their objectives and handing over, to other security agencies, for instance, the Nigerian police force, and of course, so that law and order will take place. So basically, these are the issues. But of course, they cannot take place if you have not created enabling environment, strengthen them to be able to carry out that policing duties, or even members of the community, when everybody is running helter-skelter. So basically, that is it. So the local government system has to be working. That will enable the security agencies or the ministers of defense to actualize their aims, of dealing with security challenges, because there is a limit to which the soldier will do. Yeah. They are not sparing. They rely on the society. They rely on the community. And where you have a situation where the people do not even understand what you are doing, when they are even working across purposes. Take, for instance, now, the menace of informants. To them, it's just another means of livelihood. But it is something that is grievous, that will lead to loss of lives, not just of members of his family or community, but even the security agencies. So, losing legitimacy. So, but to them, it's a means of livelihood. So, what do you create an alternative for that? So these are some of the issues. And you have to look at even the motivating things that, motivate some of these criminal elements that go into crime. Is it Boko Haram terrorism, or is it the bandit, or is it the kidnapper? And most importantly, you have to address the issue of those in the value chain of it. And I kept on saying, take for instance, somebody is kidnapped. A ransom of 10 million, 5 million is collected. I don't think the kidnappers will be moving about with 10 million naira on their body in the bush. So who invests or who keeps the money? These are the issues. And what is their motivation? So while other people are doing another thing, the other people have to be dealing. When we are talking about the military doing targeted operations, we have to also involve
and that's where that's where the interagency cooperation you spoke about earlier on,
exactly the whole society approach.
Absolutely, because one would have thought that we should be able to follow the money, whatever ransom that is being paid. Other agencies that should do the trace should also help trace such. But, the national orientation you pointed out earlier is very important here. It helps the society, and that is why in many nations, especially in the West, you've seen how they have been able to reorientate and create a culture for their people through movies, through, to the extent that a child in school knows what to do when he or she sees anything untoward. How much of it, because now you're putting your PR cap because you're also a leading member of the PR Society in Nigeria, how much of it do you think we should do, especially in the fight against insurgency?
Well, a lot of it. And I can tell you now that you have talked about Nigerian Institute of Public Relations. I'm a fellow and a member of the governing council of it. Last year, we noticed the divisive tendencies on the part of the Nigerian society. So we had this citizen summit across the 6 geopolitical zones of the country, and we held the climax here in Abuja. Now we have rebooted Nigeria, a comprehensive report with recommendation and implementation agency that should be citizen-driven. So we expect the government to also come into play to see to what extent. And thankfully, we have a member a fellow of the Nigerian Institute of Public Relations, who is the Minister of Information and National Orientation. So we intend to work hand in glove in dealing with that. And it is not only that. The alumni association of the National Institute also had similar, conference on national unity. So basically, you have to integrate all these reports. But beyond integrating them, you have to look at what are those value systems, and how do we, reorient the Nigerian society. And I will give you an example. Way back 1999, we realized that the military, had been in governance for almost 30 years or what have you. So there was need for transformation and reorientation. Hence, the government then embarked on a 15-year transformation program of the armed forces, from 2000 to 2015. But then the question is, you cannot orient in isolation of the Nigerian society, because the military comes from the Nigerian society and is also working for the Nigerian society. Yes, the curriculum in various training institutions kept on changing, but the society is also changing. The value system is also changing. Take, for instance, in those days you don't even need psychological tests to go into the armed forces, but these days you have to. It's mandatory, simply because of the value system has changed. Yeah. Then beyond this orientation and what have you, most importantly, the media has a critical role to play. Going with this, that we have to look at the concept of developmental journalism in this country, because they have a tremendous role to play in the sense that they are the people that will carry the messages and orient the society. And let us be looking at those things that make Nigeria great rather than those things that bring it backward. There are so many positive things that we can talk about ourselves. Today, I had the privilege of discussing with a very distinguished senator, and we kept on talking. He said, look, he happened to be in Umuahia and he went to Nigerian, War Museum, and he saw a lot of artifacts and all the rest, and he was wondering, an average person does not even know that Admiral Way has been a vice president, even though under military administration, for almost 9 years. Ordinarily, people do not know. So you cannot make progress, you cannot orient if you don't even know who you are. So these are the issues. So it's a collective responsibility, including the media system itself. So you guys have a critical role to play, just like the Institute of Public Relations and other professional groups, as well as the family system and opinion leaders and other institutions. So to what extent you bring all this together and make them understand that, look, making Nigeria safer, developing Nigeria is a collective responsibility, and we just have to do it. And by doing it, you require a lot of sacrifices. But of course, it is not enough for you to say somebody should make sacrifice without creating an enabling environment for him to have the zeal and determination too. So social security, economic well-being, and all the rest of the things comes into play.
Well, anyway, I think that's why the media is doing what it is doing, just what you and I were doing, irrespective of your schedule.
Yeah,
you are able to come, and we've done our part. It is hope that everyone, because it's very important that we all...
It's a work in progress.
It is a work in progress. We all look towards national orientation, which is very, very key here. I'd like to thank you for your time, General Usman Sani. Many thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome.